We will then move to the topic of character arcs. Characters, and for that matter NPCs, need to evolve with the story. The changes in the character that are affected by the story overall is called the character arc. Consider for a second your favorite characters in games and film. Are they the same person at the beginning of the story as at the end? Characters that begin perfect are boring. Characters need character arcs. In our last topic in the character module, we're going to discuss writing dialogue for games. The dialogue is a writer's best tool. It allows for character and story to be revealed to the player in a way that feels natural, and allows for plot points to be explained and gives characters personality and life. Many films are known for their great dialogue, and the same should be true for video games. However, using dialogue in games is much different than movies or television show. Video game dialogue has its own rules and tricks that every game writer should be aware of. So through these topics, we will have a better understanding of how characters work in video games, and how good character design is as important as good mechanic design for the purpose of holding an audience's attention and making a game fun and entertaining. Games mean more to us when we can relate to the characters and story. It is the use of characters that allow us to become immersed in the story by placing ourselves in their shoes. For movies, we watch the characters as an outside observer. However, in video games, we are the character and interact with the world as participants. In this module, we will explore aspects of creating characters for video games, including building personalities and motivations, interacting with non-player characters, dialogue, and how character and story interact. Our first topic we will discuss is character types in video games. Now, there are all sorts of ways of breaking down characters. However you do it, what is generally the result is either an archetype, a stereotype, or a three-dimensional being. Now, far too often in games, an archetype devolves into a stereotype, and we never even get to the three-dimensional characters. That's not to say that archetypes and stereotypes have no place in games. However, general overuse of such character types needs to stop taking place of more well-rounded and well-developed characters. The trick in doing so is being original with your characters. Our next topic is non-player characters. Unique to games is the concept of NPCs, or non-player characters. In film, all characters are basically NPCs. That is to say, the audience has no control over their actions. In a game, however, a player typically takes the role of the major protagonist within the story and has control over their actions. Every other character in the game that is not under the direct control of a living player is called a non-player character. As a writer, each of these characters, both player characters and non-player characters, should serve a purpose to the plot or the environment of the game. Video games offer an amazing variety of characters. From the cute to the monstrous, games present an unprecedented freedom in character creation, more so than any medium before it. Unfortunately, many characters still lack dimension, and many fall into stereotypes. In this topic, we will examine the different types of characters found in various genres of video games, and discuss how they break down as archetypes, stereotypes, or actual three-dimensional characters. Archetypes are broad categories of character types. Often their characteristics are drawn from mythology, or the more modern concept of the journey of the hero, as illustrated by the likes of Joseph Campbell. For Campbell, the definition of a hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. Video games have created their own archetype heroes. For example, Master Chief from the Halo series could be called a stoic warrior archetype. Typically cold and emotionless on the surface, the hero is actually deeply invested in good winning over evil. Now, this is a common character archetype in video games, and perhaps too common. When an archetype becomes too common, and the distinctions between them are blurred to the point of sameness, we risk our archetype into becoming a stereotype. It can be hard to separate a stereotype from an archetype. In fact, archetypes become stereotypes when the broad personality trait of the archetype becomes the entirety of the character. That is to say, the writer stopped developing the character beyond filling in the expected traits. This creates a flat and meaningless characters that are predictable, unoriginal, and boring. Stereotypes often fail because of cliches. Cliches are overused and bland personality traits, and they happen when lazy writers fail to attempt originality. As writers, we should be aware of shortcuts in character creation that create stereotypes. Simply checking off an archetype character traits as a checklist is a fast way into making a stereotype. What the goal really is to make an original, compelling character no one has quite seen before. Now, that doesn't mean archetype traits need to be thrown out. It simply means that something new needs to be added. Something that either plays off expected cliches in a unique way or creates some contradiction of the archetype itself. In general, for every character, think of one thing that contradicts or redefines the stereotype and make that a feature of the character. So as an example, let's take a look at our attempt at a three-dimensional character and our stoic hero. Viewed by most as the hero of the people, he does what must be done to save humanity. Taking on to himself to commit the violence necessary to save the world, he makes the sacrifices needed so that others can hold to their innocence. However, he must constantly face the real truth of his actions, that he is slipping into the very madness he defends against. Fortunately for our hero, the voices in his head aren't entirely humorless. Okay, let's look at this process again, but now we're going to take a look at another common character type in video games, and that is the damsel in distress. Now, this character type is already in danger of being a bad, outdated stereotype. But at its best, the character can demonstrate some positive traits. It might go something like this. Representing the best the world has to offer in terms of beauty, intelligence, and kindness, the damsel in distress is a constant target of evil because she alone has the power to make the world a better place. Alright, now are we happy with that description? It's not quite a stereotype. It could be worse. Let's take a look. So here's the stereotype version, seen all too often in video games and film. She is the key to a bright future, but no one knows quite why. It might just be because the artist made her so beautiful. In any regard, her purpose is to be a victim for the hero to save, and nothing more. Okay, we definitely want to reject that character. Let's try one more time and put some original spin on the cliches. Let's take a look at our write-up for our three-dimensional damsel in distress. She carries the burden of the kingdom on her narrow shoulders. Growing up in the royal family, she has seen firsthand the moral and intellectual laziness of her kin. Casting away childish dreams of handsome princes and fancy ballroom galas, she has dedicated herself to being a just ruler. However, her rejection of cultural superstitions has ostracized her from the common people, even as her focus on reason and logic pulls them out of the dark ages of the past. So as we see in these examples, it is a matter of taking that extra step with character creation that separates originality from cliched characters. For new writers, this will be a long learning process to be able to distinguish and create characters that are more archetype and less stereotype, and to eventually develop into three-dimensional characters that are engaging and unique characters. It starts, however, with understanding why a character is an archetype, a stereotype, or a fully realized three-dimensional character. So in most video games, players take on the role of a character that then interacts with other characters in the world. So every single character, whether human, monster, or something else, not under the direct control of a player, is considered a non-player character, otherwise known as an NPC. Now, NPCs are tools used to tell the player the story, or to interact with the player as enemies and allies, and to give the game world depth and a feeling of being alive and full of things happening. NPCs are most closely associated with role-playing games, but the fact is, NPCs are almost in any game where other beings inhabit the same screen as the player character's avatar. Through dialogue interaction, NPCs can reveal plot points, give quests and rewards, and even serve as red herrings and foils to solving the game. In all, they are some of the best tools game writers can use to advance the story and the game through its various levels and stages. NPCs also add flavor and tone to the game. So the inclusion of an NPC does not have to reveal a core plot point or give directions to a quest. They can also be used to help paint a better picture of the setting and the world. Most NPCs in a game, however, are enemies to be defeated. Be they be monsters, demon spawn, or malicious super-intelligent mushrooms, they are all NPCs. The non-player characters deserve the same care and depth of creation as any other character does. The rules are the same, as good results benefit the entire game. One thing to remember is that a video game, the interactions of the NPCs and the heroes of the game itself are just as important as the role in the story. For example, movies will often cut from the hero's quest to show the audience what the villain is up to. While video game cutscenes can also do this, there are other ways, better ways, to build a villain in games. In general, we will use NPCs as informants, as obstacles, as background, or some combination of all three. So first we're going to talk about using NPCs as informants. Now the purpose of an informant is to give the player vital information about the world or the game. And this can be done by either having NPCs speak directly to the player, speak indirectly to the player about the world or the environment they're in, or have that NPC give information to the player through a cutscene. NPCs can also be scripted to have actual conversations with players. This is most commonly done in what is called a dialogue tree. Now, in a dialogue tree, players are given options to have different responses to different questions from NPCs, and in such they may get different information by answering questions differently. Games like Fallout 3 and Skyrim are great examples of using dialogue trees in games and using their NPCs as informants. So the next type of NPC use we'll see is NPCs used as obstacles. And really this is what the typical use of NPCs are in games, and particularly when those obstacles make the NPCs into adversaries that must be defeated in order to move on. Now, these are the hordes of enemies the hero must defeat in the quest to save the world. They can be anything from junior monsters to the big bosses at the end of the level. But they're all NPCs, and they all serve the purpose to serve as obstacles to the player to keep him from his quest. You can also use NPCs as background. The purpose of this type of NPC is just to make the world seem bigger and more fully realized. It is often not necessary to, or even possible to completely interact with these NPCs. The purpose is to make the market seem less empty or to add color and complexity to the city scene. The player will typically know to ignore them, but they add the illusion of a real, functioning location teeming with life and activity. So finally, our NPCs can be sort of a combination of all these things. Consider the dark stranger sitting quietly in the back of the tavern. His presence alone creates a sense of unease and intrigue and informs on the world just by him being there. Then imagine the player approaches and starts a conversation. This could open up a dialogue tree, which develops the character and offers quests or directions for the character to go in. So let's talk a little bit about creating items as characters. Often it will be required to describe or write about an inanimate object or items found within a game. As writers, there's no good reason why items cannot have the same rich backgrounds and stories that characters do. So as an example, let's create our own wondrous item for a game. It will be a futuristic high-tech device that allows the user to see enemies through the walls and other objects. Remember, our goal is to create something fantastic that nevertheless seems plausible and acceptable within the context of the game. Okay, let's give it a shot. These heavy eye goggles are made of large copper dials surrounding thick amber lenses with a nylon head strip. Various spin dials, levers, lenses, and adjustment gauges cover the alien-looking device. Its technology is based partially on M-theory, which became fact after a particle accelerator accidentally tore a rip in time-space, creating the first incursion. As best could be understood, core universal vibration anomalies caused Earth's dimension to touch another, and alien monstrosities poured forth. Government scientists quickly began reverse engineering alien weapons captured from the invaders, but found them completely bizarre and impossible to make function. That is until they integrated ancient mysticism in the form of Babylonian glyphs carved into the lenses. Now they work, but scientists still don't know why. In theory, they operate by changing the wearer's eyes and brain vibrations to sync with an alien dimension. This includes seeing into the ethereal, a ghost-like plane of translucence. The end effect of this is the ability to see through solid objects. However, the process of using the goggles is extremely painful and may cause lasting damage if worn too long.